Welcome aboard, Mighty Sparrow. I'm Jerome Rand, American solo sailor, and this is Sailing Stories. Today, we're going to get into the doomed voyage of Donald Crowhurst, something I know all too well from reading about it, watching documentaries, but also experiencing firsthand what it's like to be alone out on the ocean for months at a time, and also on one trip in particular, knowing what it's like to not know where you're going to go, what you're going to do, and the isolation and stress that comes from that. Donald took it a little worse than I did, but I didn't have all the stress that he had. So let's jump right in. Late in the 1960s, Sir Francis Chichester sailed a boat by himself without stopping from England all the way down to Sydney, Australia. He did a major refit, fixed everything aboard, and then took off and made it all the way back to England, having circumnavigated by himself, only stopping once. And this got the gears turning. People started thinking about whether or not it was possible to sail a boat all the way around the world without stopping by yourself. And in 1968, a race was proposed called the Golden Globe, and anybody could come and enter it. You just had to leave by the end of October of that year, and you had to leave from above 40 degrees north latitude anywhere on the planet. Most people took off from England or France, and Crowhurst was one of 9 people to actually start in that race. Now, he was sort of an unknown character. He didn't have a ton of sailing experience. His resume wasn't built up. Bernard Moitessier and Robin Knox-Johnson, the two favorites, had both done huge voyages all over the place. But this guy came out of left field for real. And he had a very technical background in marine electronics. And he was definitely a math whiz, super, super smart. And his idea was to take a more modern boat, a trimaran, which has 3 hulls, goes through the water really fast. But it also, if it tips over, it stays tipped over. And people didn't know if a boat like that could really weather the storms of the Southern Ocean. But he wanted to take that and try and figure out a way to sort of computerize it so that the boat could sail by itself and do so really well. So that when he's sleeping, he can just keep on flying around the planet. So that was his goal. He went out, he got sponsors. They gave him a bunch of money. He got a publicist, and the story was out there, and suddenly it started to snowball to a point where all of a sudden his sponsors were like, all right, we're going to build this boat. They started building the boat. Things weren't going all that great, but still they kept going. Money started piling up, and in the end, the sponsors sort of said, well, listen, if you don't actually end up going, you're going to owe us all this money back. And that would financially ruin Donald Crowhurst if he did that. So all of a sudden, there's this external pressure. Besides just the fact that you're trying to sail alone around the world without stopping, now all of a sudden there's like a fiscal responsibility that you might be responsible for if you say, hey, you know what? This isn't actually going the way I want it to go, and the boat's not ready. He kind of was in a position where he wasn't able to really say that because he has a wife and he has kids and all that sort of stuff. So, and back then, he's trying to be like a man's man and just sort of stoically go through it. In any event, as the weeks and months crept by, other competitors took off and he's still there. He was the last one to leave, and he actually left right at the deadline, the last day he was allowed to enter the race. Got towed out, had to actually get towed back in to fix a bunch of stuff, and then eventually was able to leave. Unbeknownst to him, a huge pile of spare gear, bolts, screws, plywood, all that sort of stuff was left on the dock when he had taken off. But he couldn't come back and get it, and he set sail anyway. So he has to go down the North Atlantic to the equator, and then into the South Atlantic, and then into the big, scary part of the whole trip, which is the Southern Ocean. And believe me, the Southern Ocean is absolutely no joke. There's storms, 100-foot waves. It's an absolute chaos of a place to try and sail a boat, and it's a wonder anybody wants to go down there and do it. But there's the challenge of it, and that's what drives a lot of people. So he sails down, and he's not doing very well. The boat's not performing like he wanted to. It's actually starting to show some real big signs of weakness. And he's alone at sea, and it takes him a few weeks, and he finally gets to the equator. Now it's hot. There's not a whole lot of wind. He's not making very good time. The boat is still starting to fall apart here, there, and everywhere. And he's finding that his little computer system that he wanted to build is absolutely not going to happen. And how people know this is that he had what's called an old Marconi radio. So he was able to radio back his position and tell the publicist and all that. So it was going in the newspapers and everything. So everybody knew where he was as he was going down the line. Now, after he crossed the equator, at some point, things started to get drastically worse. He was starting to suffer from sort of a sea weariness, where when you're alone out there, you can sort of lose grip on reality a little bit. It's happened to me a few times, not quite to his extent because I didn't have those external pressures on me. But at the same time, it's a lonely, isolated place, and not everybody's brain is really equipped to handle that sort of environment. Add that fact that his boat is really starting to not perform well. I'm aboard Mighty Sparrow, which has taken me almost 100,000 miles out on all sorts of oceans, and I have full confidence in this boat. He definitely didn't. And as he's going down the South Atlantic, he's starting to head to and get closer to the Southern Ocean, which, again, is essentially hell on earth. It's a no man's land. And you're as far away from any sort of rescue as you can ever be on this planet. Now, somewhere along the line, whether it was just from the boat's performance or his own fears or the isolation, he made the decision to not continue on in the race, but he was going to keep reporting his position back as if he were continuing in the race. And I think part of this was he must have thought that, okay, I will hang out in the South Atlantic Ocean. I can sort of drift around here. There's no shipping lanes. There's no airplanes going over. Nobody's going to see me, especially back then. It would have been far emptier than it is today. But even today, if the apocalypse came, I'd probably go to the South Atlantic. So he's drifting around out there, and he figures he'll wait until the other competitors round Cape Horn and start heading back home towards South Atlantic, North Atlantic, and then he could just file in behind him, come in last place. He still was able to do it, compete, doesn't lose all that money. He appeases his sponsor, sort of looks like a hero because he's just done this epic voyage, and most importantly, no one's going to scrutinize his logbook, because back then, the only proof that anybody had that they actually did what they did was your logbook. So a ship's log has all the information day to day. Every few hours, you're jotting it down. Plus, back then, they didn't have GPS. They were doing all their navigation using a sextant and the sun and the stars. So all those calculations have to be done. But because he was so smart, and he was such an intellectual guy when it came to math and electronics and all that, he was able to keep a real log of his positions and then also start to build a fake logbook where he was able to calculate what his calculations needed to be if he was in this other area, which is mind-blowing. I couldn't even imagine how complicated that would get and how much time it would take. But again, if your brain is geared towards that sort of stuff, it's possible. So this is what he was doing. And I think because he was already telling sort of a little white lie, he started to embellish a little bit as well. So all of a sudden, he kind of went from mediocre mileage each day to all of a sudden having set new world records in speed, which probably wasn't the best idea, but in any event, it only sparked a little bit of questioning back home. Most people were just super excited about it and couldn't believe it because his publicist was good. He was really good at whipping people into a frenzy. Now, a couple months go by and Sir Robin Knox-Johnson and Bernard Moitessier and Nigel Tetley are almost the only ones left in this pack of sailboats. All the rest of them have already given up or they've been dismasted, damaged, and had to quit. These other guys are sort of cruising along, but it's starting to narrow down his ability to not claim any fame in finishing this voyage, because if he ends up only being the second or third person, that's noteworthy, and they're going to pick apart his logbook like crazy. And he must have known this at that point. More time goes by. The other racers keep going around, and some of them are closing in on Cape Horn and going to turn into the South Atlantic and start heading north. He's down somewhere near the Falkland Islands, and his boat is really starting to fall apart. So much so that he ended up actually having to pull into port somewhere in South America and get some plywood and screws and other things. So he shows up there. Again, this is back in the 60s, so he was able to sort of just cruise in. I don't even know if he fully checked into customs. It would have been a small little place anyway, and was given some stuff, given some provisions, and then he took off. And to them, I think he was just some crazy old sailor who was out there by himself. So it wasn't like a big thing where they were calling around trying to figure out who this guy was. They didn't care. So he gets away with that, and he heads back out to sea. Meanwhile, Knox Johnson, Motissier, they all round the horn, and they're starting to head up. So his time has almost come where he can actually start making his way back up. And he's still sending these false position reports all the time, going back home to England. And at this point, it gets a little bit more crazy because Knox Johnson and Motissier are in monohulls, so they're very similar to Mighty Sparrow, just one hull, a traditional sailboat. The other guy, Nigel Tetley, is also in a trimaran, so there's just two trimarans. They are sort of the hopefuls for the time, the fastest time in the race. The other two, it looks like one of them is going to be the actual first one to finish. A few short weeks later, Bernard Motissier ends up dropping out of the race and continuing on to go and sail halfway around the world again because he was having so much fun out at sea. We'll do another video on him later. So now it's down to 3 people. And this is where the crunch really begins, because now he realizes if he makes it back, he is going to be one of the winners of this race, and they are going to scrutinize him, and the ability for him to be able to fudge all this information is questionable at best. And he's been out at sea now for months and months and months alone with only that one little stop. So you can imagine the pressures in your head, and you think, okay, if this all comes out, I'm probably going to lose all this money in my house and my business and all this stuff, and my family's going to hate me, and all these pressures are coming in, and your boat is really literally falling apart underneath you. Those are insane amounts of things to deal with mentally while you're out at sea. When I'm out at sea, personally, I don't even want anybody to text me something that is like bad news that's going on back in the world of land, because it can affect me to such a higher degree, because that's all I have to think about when I'm out there. And so I usually tell friends and family, I'm like, if something really bad happens, tell me when I get back. I don't want to hear about it out here. So he's dealing with an incredible amount of stress. I couldn't even imagine it. And as he's going north and north, Nigel Tetley's up in front of him, Knox Johnson's up in front of him, and because the publicity is getting out and they know his position, and he's starting to report his real position now, eventually it gets back to Nigel Tetley, who's the other guy in the trimaran, and he starts pushing his boat, which is very damaged because he's actually sailed it all the way around the world. He's pushing the boat too hard. He gets into some bad weather in the North Atlantic, and the boat sinks. He gets rescued, so he's okay, but now, guess what? Donald Crowhurst is guaranteed, if he brings that boat back, he is guaranteed to win first prize. And now that lie is definitely not going to hold up. So I think that was pretty much the tipping point. When all that information came out, that's when things just snapped. And eventually, weeks later, after not hearing anything from Donald Crowhurst, Robin Knox Johnson had pulled in after 312 days. He won the race. Big congratulations, 100,000 people waiting for him. Eventually, a small little sailboat is found by a freighter going from somewhere to like Panama, I don't know. And they spot this little boat, and they go and they pull up to it to see if everything's okay. Back then, they used to do that. And eventually, they find that there's nobody on the boat. The boat's in kind of a mess. There's dishes, there's food, it's just a big sloppy mess. And they don't find anybody on it. They do, however, find 2 sets of logbooks, and after a bit of investigation, they realize it was Donald Crowhurst, what he was doing, and what he was pretending to have done. And at first, I believe the captain of the freighter thought it best to just hide the fake logbook that let out the scam and all that sort of stuff. And that didn't end up coming true. He ended up giving that up, and the world found out about what Donald Crowhurst had done. But they ended up pulling the boat onto the freighter, and they were promised to bring it back. They ended up not doing that either. They offloaded it somewhere, and the actual hull of the ship, the hull of that sailboat, is on a little island called Cayman Brac in the Caribbean. It's still sitting there today, just the hull. They say it's haunted. It's a really eerie little spot. I've never been there personally, but I think maybe one day if I'm in the area, I might have to stop by. But in that logbook, towards the end, it goes from, actual things and information that's pertinent to everyday life to the ramblings of a madman. 20,000 words of complete gibberish, all coming to a close with "It's the Mercy." And it's thought that after writing that and after completely breaking down, Donald Crowhurst jumped into the sea and ended his own life. Now, the only bright side of this story, I think, is that in the end, Sir Robert Knox Johnson, who won both prizes, both the money and the trophy, ended up giving all the prize money to Donald Crowhurst's family so that they were able to keep their house. One of the sad truths about this was that the sponsors had long ago promised that they actually would not take anything back if he decided to throw in the towel, but word never got back to Donald Crowhurst. So there's some pretty sad aspects to how the story all played out. But from my own experience, I had on my second grand voyage where I was supposed to go through the Northwest Passage, I got up there, I was turned back by the Canadian government, and had to circle around the Atlantic Ocean during one of the busiest hurricane seasons on record. Now, somewhere after about a month or two, I was over towards Africa in between the Azores and the Cape Verde Islands. I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know where I was going to go. I had a ton of food. I had a lot of fuel. The boat was fully supplied for a 9-month voyage, and yet I had nowhere to go. I had spent every penny I had. Suddenly, my life was feeling pretty empty at that point, and it was during the height of the COVID pandemic. So I couldn't stop at a lot of the places that I thought, this could be a safe zone. If a hurricane decides to billow up right near me, I can at least head into port and get out of it. That was no longer an option. And it was hot, and it was raining, and there was one day in particular where essentially the noise of the engine throbbing away was getting to me. The rain got to me. The heat got to me. The fact that I didn't know where I was going and I felt like I was stuck at sea had all sort of crunched in on my brain to a point where I went up on deck, and I remember having this uncontrollable feeling that maybe it was time to just jump in. And it was scary enough that after just a minute or two of standing up there with that urge and not knowing if I could actually control myself, I ducked down below and I slammed the door and I shut the engine off, and I just sort of drifted for a while, and I came up with a game plan to make my way back to the U.S., back to home where I could be safe and sound, and then figure my life out from there. The only problem was it was still during that crazy hurricane season. So I had to take a longer route. I was out at sea for 88 days total. So not anywhere near the longest stint I've ever had out there, but it was something to do with that feeling of being stuck on the ocean and that hopelessness of not knowing where I could go and not being able to go places. I think that gave me a little bit of insight into the world that Donald Crowhurst was living full on in for months and months and months at a time. And in the beginning, when I first read the book A Voyage for Madmen by Peter Nichols, which is a great source for more information about this story. I kind of didn't really like Donald Crowhurst. I thought he was kind of stupid and didn't made a lot of bad choices. And regardless, he probably did. But now, after having my own experiences out there, I can understand how it was worth giving it a shot. And I could see how it could seem like that. But I could also see how your brain and your mind can slip out there. So it's not something that I take lightly. On the first voyage, I didn't worry about it even for 1 second. I thought, yeah, I can handle being alone, isolated. It's not a problem at all. I can do it for as long as I want. But now I do know that without that purpose and that goal and being completely honest with everyone around you, your mind can definitely slip. So that's the Doom Voyage of Donald Crowhurst. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this content, let us know in the comments, and I will do more about it because there are a ton of sailing and solo sailing stories that I've read about over the years, and I'd love to share them with you and give my little perspective on them as well. Thanks for watching.